Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So a couple weeks ago, I filmed a review slash first impressions video on the new Army Painter Speed Paints 2.0. Now, I am quite familiar with the Citadel contrast paints. I tend to use these a lot, which is what made me want to try the new Army Painter Speed Paint. And I thought that it would make for a really good video to compare the two together. I have 7 colors in front of me and I tried to match as best I could. I do have more contrast paints versus the Army Painter Speed Paints. I wanted to just use what I already have. So I tried, as I said, to match as best I could. Some of the colors aren't exactly like the same shades, but I tried my best. So I have yellow, red, purple, blue, black, brown, and green. I also tried to make it as fair as possible, so I am using the same mini to paint along with the same color schemes, so that way we can really tell the difference between the two. And I did the same priming method with the zenithal priming, started with the black, and then I went over with a white. So let's see how these two paints do side by side. Okay, so I'm going to be starting with red first. This is the Citadel Contrast Paint Blood Angels Red. I absolutely love this color. It is one of my favorites. I use it in almost every painting session. It is vibrant and opaque. A little bit goes a long way. It has great coverage. It also does a great job of adding that highlight and shadow effect. Now on camera, the color does look a little bit more orange, but as it dries, it definitely gets a lot darker. But when compared to the Army Painter Red, the Citadel Contrast is a little bit more warm toned. Next is the Army Painter Speed Paint Slaughter Red. This color is also vibrant, has decent coverage, and is quite opaque, but I will say it took a lot more paint than the contrast paint did. Also, you'll see in the final dried mini that there are lots of spots that I missed, and this was with me trying to be careful and actually cover the full mini with the paint. So I do have to hand it to Citadel for that. As I mentioned, Citadel's Blood Angels Red is a little bit more warm toned, has a little bit more orange in it. This one you can see it looks a little more pink on camera. Once again, when it dries, it is more true red, but it definitely is more cooler toned than the contrast paint. Here are the two finished minis. For the red, Citadel is on the left and Army Painter is on the right. I personally like the Citadel contrast paint a little bit better. I feel like it did a better job with the highlight and the shadow effect, and it has like different shades and variations of the color, but the Army Painter still did a decent job. Okay, moving on to yellow. Spoiler alert, I did not like either of them, and I hear that yellow is just a really hard color to get. This is Citadel's Contrast Iandin Yellow, and after doing a little bit of research, it could be user error on my part. I maybe didn't apply enough paint, and some miniature painters said that they had to go in with multiple layers, so that could possibly improve the color. I will say, as far as the color itself and the tone, I do very much like the yellow. It's one of the more true yellows that I have. Next, I have the Army Painter's Zealot Yellow, and boy, does this pull orange. So for me, Citadel wins as far as the color, but I will say the Army Painter does a great job of pulling into all of the different crevices, and I think it does a better job with the highlighting and the shadow effect. You can see a lot more of the detail on this mini. Okay, moving on to brown, I'm still using the same mini. This is Citadel Contrast Cygor Brown, and honestly, it's not my favorite of the browns within the contrast paint line. I much prefer the Gore Grunta Fur. It is a little bit more warmer, but to me, the Cygor Brown was a better color match to the Army Painter Speed Paint Satchel Brown. Now that being said, I still very much enjoy this color. I use it in almost all of my painting sessions. It is opaque, a little bit goes a long way. It has great coverage, and I do love this color. Okay, so moving on to possibly my favorite Army Painter Speed Paint. This is Satchel Brown, and I love this color. I'm going to be using it so much. I love the consistency. I love the way it pools. I love how it adds great shadow and highlight and different shades of the brown. A little bit goes a long way with this color, which I did not appreciate as much with the other colors from the Army Painter Speed Paints. In my opinion, I prefer the Army Painter Speed Paint Brown versus the Cygor Brown from Citadel Contrast Paints. Here are the finished minis for yellow and brown. For this one, I think I prefer the Army Painter, although the yellow just pulls so orange, but you can see a lot more detail in the face. You can see the eyes, you can see the spikes really well on the legs with Satchel Brown. So I think Army Painter wins, but I will say I prefer the Citadel Contrast yellow color better. Moving on to green, this is Citadel's Contrast Orc Flesh. This is such a pretty shade of green. I just love how bright and emerald color it is. It's vibrant, it pulls really well into the crevices. It does a really good job of adding that highlight and shadow effect. Freaking spilled. Oh. So I'm trying to clean it up. And as you can see, I spilled my paint pot, which sucks because these paints are so expensive. I tried so hard to save as much paint as I could. I was using a syringe. I was dipping my paintbrush on the table and using that to paint the rest of my mini. I wish I could say this is the first time this has happened, but unfortunately it's not. Okay, moving on to the Army Painter Speed Paint Orc Skin. Of all the colors, I have to say the greens are probably the truest to matching each other because they're both labeled for painting orcs. Now, I'm not familiar with painting orcs in Warhammer or orcs in general, but this green looks to be a little too neon or lime to me. Tell me what you think, but this still does a really good job of adding that highlight and shadow. The color is still quite opaque, although the consistency is a little bit thinner compared to the contrast paint. Moving on to purple, I am starting with Citadel's Contrast Shyish Purple. Of the 7 colors that I am comparing in this video, the purples are the least matching. This one is a lot more plum versus the Army Painter. You're going to see it's much brighter. Now, this isn't a color that I use frequently just because it is such a dark color and I need to get a more true purple contrast paint. But as far as the effects, this color works really well. As you can see, there's a lot of different shade variations. It's pooling well. It's adding highlight and shadows. I will say when I was looking up this color online, all of the colors are so much more vibrant and bright versus the color in real life. So if this is a color that you are going to purchase online versus in store, just beware. It is much more plum than, as you can see, the picture is showing a much brighter purple. Moving on to Army Painter Speed Paint Purple Swarm. As you can see, this purple is so much more vibrant than the Shyish purple from Citadel. I could have gone out and tried to better color match, but I wanted to stick with what I had already. These 2 paint colors together is definitely giving a Barney color scheme. Now, as far as how the paint is performing, it's doing quite well. It's giving great effects. It has great coverage. The consistency was great. So yeah, overall, I highly recommend. Finally, here are the finished minis for the green and purple, and also I added brown to the tree bark. I would say for this mini, I'm a bit torn. I prefer the Citadel green better, but I prefer the Army Painter purple better. I think it's giving better effect between the highlighting in the dark, especially on the arm. You can really see a lot more shadow, and maybe it's just because the color itself is a bit brighter. And you guys know how I feel about that Army Painter Speed Paint Brown. I love it. So I do like the tree bark a little bit better on the Army Painter side as well, although I did miss a spot I can see. Moving on to blue, this is the Citadel Contrast Leviathan Blue, and this color is fine. I have 2 other blues from Citadel that I much prefer, but this one color matched better with the Army Painter. As I was painting with this blue, I thought it was doing a fine job. It was applying well, but now that I'm looking at it, it's really patchy and I don't like it at all, unfortunately. Citadel tends to be pretty consistent with their paints, but I have to say this is probably the worst one along with the yellow. Next I have Beowulf Blue from the Army Painter, and for this one I will say make sure to really shake it, because as you saw, it came out purple at first, and that was with me using my Vortex paint spinner. Plus these bottles come with those 2 little mixing balls. Luckily the paint was still wet and I was able to wipe off the purple pigment and reapply with the blue. As far as the tone of the blue, I much prefer this over the Leviathan blue. Also, it appears to be going on a lot smoother, less patchy. It is doing a good job with highlighting and shadows, but the consistency of this paint was really thin. I was having trouble painting small details and only getting the blue where I wanted the blue. All right, last color. So this is Citadel's Contrast Black Legion, and I really like this color. Actually, this is the first time that I've used it. I only have a gray from the Citadel contrast lines, and everyone that I was watching kept recommending Black Legion, and so I thought I would go ahead and give it a try. Obviously, it's going to be harder to see the difference between the highlighting and the shadows because the color itself is so dark, but I was hoping that it was going to be a rich black, and I think it did a really good job. Last color, so this is Army Painter's Grim Black. I really liked this color. It did a great job. Very similar to Black Legion. It's a little bit lighter, less rich, so you can see more highlighting and shadowing once it dried. It did a great job. Here's the last mini side by side. I ended up painting on faces. I prefer the Army Painter one. The Citadel Blue is just really splotchy. And yes, although I really liked Black Legion by Citadel, Grim Black did a great job as well. If anything, I see more spots that I missed with Black Legion than with Grim Black. Okay, so time for my final thoughts. As I was painting them side by side, I was actually quite shocked. I really thought going into this video that I was going to prefer the Citadel contrast paints because I'm just more familiar with them. I use them quite frequently with my painting. I've been using them for a while now, and when I was doing the Army Painter Speed Paint review, I felt like maybe there was a little bit of a learning curve with them, but as I was painting them side by side, I'm quite shocked at how similar they were. The yellow ones, I didn't care for either of them. I mean, they both were meh. The reds did really well together. The blacks were also really well. I thought that I was going to just love Citadel. I will say I think Citadel is a little bit more consistent than the Army Painter because there are some colors that came in the set that I really didn't care for. So I also noticed that the Citadel dries a little bit more. Satin Army Painter is a little bit more matte. Now the bottles are a big thing. As you saw, I knocked over my green, so that is a con. Obviously the price is a big thing as well. Citadel is almost twice as expensive as the Army Painter. I'm probably going to continue to buy both. I think the color range for the Citadel is a little bit bigger than the Army Painter. It's really hard to tell. Price aside, I might prefer Citadel a little bit more, but it's twice as expensive. So, I mean, these still did a great job. So really, all in all, I'm quite shocked. I think they both have pros and cons. I would say go with the color you want and your price point. So if you can afford Citadel and they're the color you want, get that. If you're on a budget and you need the Army Painter, they still do a fantastic job and you can still find the color that you want as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you next time in another video. Bye!